Hello, everyone. My life felt like a sunrise after years of darkness. I was about to marry Ethan, the man I had dreamed of sharing my forever with, kind, patient, the kind of man who made every ordinary day feel extraordinary. Everything was set for our wedding in a small coastal town in Maine. The white chairs overlooked the ocean, the soft wind carried the scent of salt and lilacs, and the music we had chosen floated gently in the air. My dress shimmered under the light, and my mother's hands trembled as she fixed the last strand of my hair. I remember her whispering, "You deserve every bit of this happiness," and for a moment, I truly believed I did. Ethan and I had met 5 years earlier at a book fair, where we both reached for the same novel. He smiled, I blushed, and somehow that small moment became the beginning of a story that felt destined. I had never met anyone who understood my silence as much as my words. I thought what we had was unshakable. That day, surrounded by our families and closest friends, I felt my heart bursting with gratitude. Everything was unfolding exactly as I had imagined. What I didn't know was that the same sea breeze that caressed my face that morning would, by the end of the night, carry away everything I thought was mine. Among all the people who came to celebrate with us, there was one I couldn't imagine the day without, my cousin and best friend, Grace Miller. She wasn't just family, she was my anchor, my other half. We had shared secrets since childhood, dreams whispered in the dark, promises we swore would never break. That's why I asked her to be my maid of honor. Everyone agreed she was the perfect choice. Grace smiled as she adjusted my veil, her eyes soft and full of what I believed was pride. She held my hands and said, "You're finally getting the love you always waited for." I didn't know that behind those gentle words lived something I could never have imagined, a truth that would shatter everything I knew about love, loyalty, and trust. We had chosen a quiet inn by the cliffs, surrounded by wildflowers and the endless sound of waves crashing against the rocks. The place was magical, like something out of a storybook. White curtains swayed in the breeze, candles flickered along the wooden path leading to the arch, and the ocean glowed gold under the setting sun. It felt like time had stopped just for us. Ethan smiled at me from across the garden, and I thought, this is what peace must feel like. Everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect. The night before the wedding, we hosted a small dinner for our closest loved ones. The tables were lit with fairy lights, laughter filled the air, and wine glasses chimed with every toast. Ethan sat beside me, his hand resting gently over mine, while Grace made everyone laugh with her easy charm. I remember thinking how lucky I was, to have a best friend who loved me so deeply and a man who made me feel so seen. That night, I went to bed smiling, certain that I was walking straight into my happy ending. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and calm. I woke up to the distant sound of waves and seagulls, feeling that rare kind of happiness that comes only once in a lifetime. Grace was the first one to enter my room, holding a tray with breakfast and a cup of coffee just the way I liked it. "Today's the day," as she said softly. I hugged her tightly, not knowing that I was embracing the person who would soon tear my world apart. My father took my arm as we walked down the aisle. The sound of the violin filled the air, and the guests turned with warm smiles. I saw Ethan standing at the altar, his eyes locked on mine, his lips trembling slightly as if he couldn't believe this was real. I thought his emotion was love. I didn't see the guilt hiding behind it. As I walked toward him, step by step, I believed I was walking into the rest of my life. But I was walking into the end of the one I knew. The ceremony was everything I had ever dreamed of. The sun cast a soft golden light over us as the officiant spoke about love, patience, and trust. When he asked if I took Ethan to be my husband, I didn't hesitate. My voice trembled, but it was steady enough to carry my joy. "I do," I said, smiling through tears. Ethan said it too, though for a brief second, His gaze faltered, and his voice caught in his throat. I brushed it off as nerves, the kind everyone feels on such a big day. When we kissed, everyone clapped, and I thought, this is the moment my life begins. Dinner was served under a canopy of lights that shimmered like stars. The tables were decorated with seashells and white roses, and soft music played in the background. Laughter and toasts filled the air. My father stood, proud and emotional, speaking about how love, like the sea, could be calm and wild at once. I squeezed Ethan's hand, but he didn't squeeze back. His smile was polite, his laughter delayed. When he looked at me, I felt something distant in his eyes, like he was already somewhere else. Grace sat beside me, radiant and joyful, telling stories that made everyone laugh. She refilled my glass, brushed my arm when she passed behind me, and kept asking if I was happy. Happier than I've ever been, I told her, and I meant it. I couldn't see the tremor in her smile when she heard my words. The evening drifted on with soft music and the gentle crash of waves. When the last song ended, Ethan and I went up to the small suite overlooking the cliffs. I had imagined that moment for years, the first night as husband and wife, filled with laughter, closeness, and whispered promises. I closed the door behind us, my heart beating fast. Ethan removed his jacket, loosened his tie, and stood silently by the window. I went to hug him, but he stepped aside, pretending to look for something in his bag. "I'm exhausted," he murmured, his tone flat and distant. I laughed softly, thinking he was joking, but he didn't smile. He turned off the lamp on his side of the room and lay down facing away from me. The sea roared in the distance, but inside, everything was still. I sat on the edge of the bed, frozen, unsure of what I had done wrong. My dress still smelled of flowers and salt, but the joy I had felt just hours ago had vanished into the quiet. I lay down, tears sliding silently down my face. That night, I didn't fall asleep as a wife. I fell asleep as a stranger beside the man I thought I knew. I woke up just before dawn. The room was dim, the air still heavy with the scent of salt and wilted roses. Ethan wasn't beside me. For a brief second, I thought he'd gone to watch the sunrise. He always said mornings by the ocean felt like a kind of prayer. I smiled at the thought, trying to shake away the unease from the night before. But when I reached for my phone, I saw a message notification, one he had forgotten to silence. The name that flashed across the screen stopped my breath. Grace Miller. My chest tightened. My mind told me it was nothing. Maybe she was asking about the day's plans. Maybe she was thanking him for helping with the decorations. But my body knew better. That quiet, instinctive ache in my stomach told me that something sacred had already been broken. I hesitated, then opened the message. It wasn't long, just a single line. "I can still taste you." The world blurred. My hands shook as I scrolled through their messages, hundreds of them, hidden under nicknames and late-night timestamps. The truth poured out like poison, the secret trips, the hidden glances, the excuses that suddenly made sense. Every memory I had of them, the shared laughter, the hugs, the whispered congratulations, twisted into something cruel. Grace, my sister in all but blood. Ethan, my husband of less than 12 hours. I couldn't breathe. I ran outside, barefoot, the morning wind cutting against my skin. The ocean stretched endlessly in front of me, vast, merciless, and cold. I stood there as the sun rose, burning gold across the waves. My wedding dress clung to me, heavy with salt and tears. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The sea took it from me, roaring louder, as if it understood my pain. I watched the tide pull away and thought, so this is how love ends, quietly, like a wave retreating from the shore. Behind me, I heard the door open. Ethan's voice, low and uncertain, called my name. I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say. I walked back inside, past the empty tables and fading flowers, and packed my things in silence. When Grace appeared at the end of the hallway, her eyes wide with something that looked like guilt but sounded like fear, I simply said, "You can have him." And I walked away. That morning, I drove until the ocean disappeared behind me. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving, because stopping meant remembering. The wedding dress lay crumpled in the passenger seat, and I watched it flutter like a ghost in the wind. Somewhere between the cliffs and the highway, I realized I wasn't driving away from them. I was driving toward myself. The days that followed were a blur of motion and silence. I rented a small cabin deep in the mountains, no signal, no neighbors, just the sound of wind moving through the trees. For the first time in years, I was completely alone. The first few nights, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, Ethan's hands in her hair, Grace's smile, the vows that had turned to ash before they were even dry. I screamed into pillows until my voice was gone. Then I sat by the window, staring at the horizon, wondering if I had somehow caused this. But slowly, the quiet began to change me. I started going on long walks through the forest, collecting small pieces of the world that still felt pure. Pine cones, feathers, stones shaped like hearts. I wrote letters I never sent. I cried until there were no tears left, and then, one morning, I didn't cry at all. That's when I realized healing doesn't happen all at once. It comes in whispers, the kind that say, "You're still here." Months passed. I painted again, something I hadn't done in years. My hands, once trembling from heartbreak, found steadiness in color. I painted the ocean, not the one that had watched me break, but the one that had always been there, endless and forgiving. I painted my own reflection, not as the bride I once was, but as the woman who had survived. The world didn't feel cruel anymore. It just felt honest. One afternoon, while buying supplies in town, I met someone. His name was Daniel, quiet eyes, kind smile, the kind of presence that doesn't demand space but fills it naturally. We spoke about art, about music, about how both of us ended up hiding in the same forgotten corner of the world. There was no spark, no thunder, just warmth, the kind that seeps in slowly and stays. We started meeting often, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to walk. He never asked about my past, and I never offered it. He didn't try to fix me, and maybe that's why I began to heal. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, he said, "You look like someone who finally learned how to breathe again." And for the first time, I laughed, not because I had forgotten, but because I had survived remembering. It's been 2 years since that day by the ocean. I don't think of Ethan or Grace with anger anymore. What they did was a storm, and storms always pass. What remains is the calm, the kind that only comes after everything has been washed clean. I'm still learning what love means, but I know this now: love isn't who stays. It's what remains when everyone else leaves. You. Peace doesn't arrive like a grand revelation. It slips in quietly, almost unnoticed, in the way the morning light lands softly on your face, or how the air smells different after rain. One morning, I woke up to the sound of birds outside my window, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel heavy. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and the world looked gentle again. The ache that once lived in my chest was still there, but softer now, like a scar that no longer hurts to touch. Sometimes I still dream of the sea, not the day it broke me, but the calm that followed. In my dreams, I'm standing on the cliffs again, only this time, I'm not waiting for anyone. I'm watching the waves move in rhythm with my own breathing. I used to think love was about forever, about finding someone who promised not to leave. But now I know love can also be the act of letting go, of choosing yourself after being forgotten. Daniel still visits sometimes. We paint together in silence, or sit on the porch as twilight folds over the mountains. There's something sacred in the quiet companionship we share. No expectations, no demands, just two people who understand what it means to start over. One evening, he asked if I'd ever love again. I smiled and said, maybe. But this time, it will begin with me. He nodded, and that was enough. I kept the veil from my wedding. Not because I couldn't let go, but because it reminds me of who I was before everything fell apart. A woman who still believed in love, in hope, in beginnings. I don't see her as naive anymore. I see her as brave. It takes courage to believe in something even after you've seen it break. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: heartbreak doesn't destroy you, it introduces you to yourself. The pain, the silence, the rebuilding, it's all a conversation with the parts of you that needed to be found. I don't wait for the tides anymore. I've become the ocean, vast, unpredictable, and endlessly alive. And somewhere between the waves and the wind, I finally found what I was looking for all along: peace. The camera would fade in on a soft dawn, golden light spilling across the sea, the waves slow and tender, like the world had learned to breathe again. My voice would return, quiet but sure, carried by the sound of the wind. Sometimes life doesn't end where you thought it would. Sometimes it pauses, shatters, and rebuilds itself into something unrecognizable, yet more true than before. I'd be walking barefoot along the shoreline, the hem of my dress brushing the foam. No music yet, just the hush of the tide and the cry of distant gulls. Then, gently, a piano begins, slow notes, spaced apart like heartbeats finally finding rhythm again. I used to think love was about finding the right person. Now I know it's about becoming the right person, for yourself. The frame would widen, the ocean vast, sky painted in soft gold and blue. I stop walking, close my eyes, and let the water wash over my feet. Maybe one day, I'll love again. But this time, I'll begin from here, from peace, from truth, from me. The music swells, strings joining softly. A final shot of the sea, endless and calm. Then the screen fades to white, and a whisper of my last words lingers over the credits. Not every ending is tragedy. Some are the quiet beginnings of becoming whole. Remember this: your heart can break and still grow stronger. And sometimes, the greatest story is the one where you choose yourself. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.